we've been following the progress of some of the builds in the shop, and this is what your atypical big block Cobra will look like when it's all finished. Some of the features I'd like to point out on this are things like the standard hood scoop that they have on this car to draw the cool air into the superheated engine bay of these things through the turkey pan, typically around the carburetors. The quick lifts on the front of the car, or the quick jacks for getting the thing up quickly for a tire change during racing. Your standard side pipes in a flat black color, so it's good for radiating the heat and that type of thing. So this is your atypical, if you like, 427 Cobra that you'd see going down the street. You've been following along with the progress on the build that we've been working on, and we can take a look at what something like this would look like when you really are bringing the project to the next level. This one, as you can see, has got an aluminum body on it like the original cars. When I say this is like the original cars, we've really got a lot of detail into this to make it very much like the original cars. And the people that know them will spot things like the rear fender shape, where this one is specified to have the street style fender lip very closely running into the rocker panels of the car. It does not have the SC flare, because with this particular car we're replicating a certain model and a certain time frame in history, and there was only 2 of these cars built. What you might have noticed already is this large by huge hood over the front of this car, and so obviously at this point, if you know them again, you'd recognize this as one of the replicas of only 2 supersnake or supercharged cars that they made of the Cobra. One for Carroll Shelby, one for Bill Cosby. Of those 2 cars that they built, only one of them survived because they're such incredibly overpowered machines, and so we're building a very exacting replica of the one that Carroll Shelby did for himself as his personal car. The body, as I pointed out, is an aluminum handmade body, and handmade in England by some of the original craftsmen that were affiliated with AC back in the day. The body was built by North Devon Metalcraft, and those guys are, even today, they're building the modern handmade aluminum Shelbys that you would order from Shelby American. The body has been built old school over wooden bucks, put together a panel at a time where they formed the panels to the shapes of each piece of the car, and you can see the parts that have been sanded and metal finished out on this thing, where the seams are, where we've had flares added to this, where the side of a fender has been welded to the inside of a fender, that type of thing. The aluminum is a 16 gauge aluminum, so it's a little heavier than an original, which would be like a 55 thou thick material on the 427s. This is about a 62 thou thick, or a 16 gauge, or a 16th of an inch. The aluminum has got to be something that's soft enough to be shaped, so we typically make panels like this out of a 3003 alloy. The features of the body are starting to be installed and lined up with things at this point. Things like the side pipe cutout holes have been positioned and cut undersized. These lips will be rolled over and finished to make them a little larger on the opening and to give you a nice sturdy and safe edge on the edge of the fender openings. You can see, shop dog, you can see things like the louvers have been made right out of this panel, where it's been slit through the middle and the panel has been folded back in on itself, given a lip here and an attachment plate on the inside of it for the side louvers on the car, for the additional ventilation that these huge underhood temperatures would produce on these cars. this car will have additional comp features for things like that, which I'll show you when we get a little further along with inner fenders and panels that will be fitted to this car. This body at this point is ready to be hammered around the chassis, and you'll have seen some of the chassis details and the bird cage and the construction in earlier spiels that we've done on this car. So yeah, having the body fitted up at this point, gone over it very carefully and making sure that there's no gaps between the engine bay and the cockpit of the car, because if there's any gaps where this body hasn't been fitted up very carefully to the foot boxes, fitted up very carefully to the firewall, and then sealed around every edge of those, any little crack, gap, hole is cause for the air to be pushed in the nose and forcing its way through into the cockpit of the car. And that's not very comfortable for the driver, and it pretty much guarantees that the passenger's not going to want to ride with you more than twice. And we don't want to, even with high temperature driving shoes and everything else, we don't want to be melting our shoes and sticking to the pedals these days. So that's about where we're at with this project right now. It's going to be pretty exciting when we start actually final fitting it for the seam that you see here, and we weld these two together, and now it's been finally made ready to be attached from body to the chassis with the super Ligera construction method of building these cars. I did want to take a second to point out one of the major features of this car. You've seen what it looks like compared to a standard one, where we'd normally have like a flat black side pipe. This car is getting a full chromed exhaust system, chromed roll bar, some of the flashy stuff on the outside to set it apart. What really sets it apart is this thing here, this huge bubble hood to clear the twin Paxton superchargers. We got this fiberglass hood from Mr. Bruce down in Pennsylvania, and this is a real good fit over the superchargers, just clearing everywhere we want it to be. We'll show you some of the features that we've been working around of fitting all of that stuff under the hood of the car. But yeah, this is a good shape and a good fit on this car in fiberglass. Since we're hand making the whole car out of aluminum, or aluminium, because this was actually made in England, of course, we are utilizing a aluminium hood on this car, and so to give us a pretty good jump start on all the metal shaping that this would entail, because I'd looked pretty carefully at this shape for a while and trying to figure out how we were going to make it out of aluminum. And it's almost like a hood that's been worked around the edges over a hood. The Kirkhams over in Utah were very kind to go ahead of us on this trail, and they've made the tooling to stretch form this hood skin to shape. And so we've got the stretch formed hood skin, which is 3/4 of the hood missing the front edge of it. Because you can only get so much out of a stretched piece of aluminum before it just decides to yield and says, I'm not going any further. So we have this aluminum hood skin we're going to be fitting up to the hood frame, the standard hood frame on the car, and all the flashing and the body panels. We'll look at some of those details as we go through the process. And this piece here will be trimmed back around the line, and we will give a little shape and put through the wheel a strip of aluminum to make the front of this hood, so we've got a complete skin ready to fit onto this Super Snake project. Okay, this is a pretty exciting time for this project. The chassis that we've put together here, all to 60s blueprints, and fortunately to some of the 60s original cars that we've had access to reference some of the hard to find, hard to measure dimensions and some of the details of the frames of this car. This is been blasted and painted by our buddy Eli English, and it's looking pretty good now in the paint that we specified. It's a satin black. It's an equipment or a machinery paint, so it's very hard wearing, and it's good and hard for chassis applications like this. So we're pretty excited to see the chassis back, and you can see, looking at it, we're starting to put some of the parts on the car. It's a really exciting time for the project. We had to do a couple of modifications specially for this because we're turning it into a super snake. We had to lower the radiator slightly and move it ahead slightly because there's an awful lot of stuff to fit here under the hood of this car, and now we're putting even more on top of that. We've done a couple of little modifications to the pusher fan brackets because the fan and motor arrangement has basically been reversed on the pusher fans for the front of the nose opening on this car. We've had to add an oil cooler bracket in a different place to what they normally are. So there's a lot of subtle little details that have been done very much to the original specs of the one single car that we're trying to copy exactly. As you look at the chassis here, you'll see we've got things like the foot boxes in place. This foot box has now been had a stamped tag installed on it. This matching number has been put on the shock tower, so we've got the correct style tag with the right locations and all that sort of silly little details that we really get off on. You'll see on the foot boxes we've wrapped them with a heat insulation and reflective material because of all the massive amount of heat from the headers on this car. We've taken the opportunity on this to wrap the heat insulation right around the outsides as well, so that it's shielding it from the hot pipes as well as from the high temperature of the headers. Other things that are starting to go on this car at this time, you can see we've started putting stainless plumbing on there. So we've got a full stainless line and bracketry and all that stuff with fittings going right out to the flex lines at this point for the brakes. We've got master cylinders installed now just on the brakes because there is no clutch in this car. We're building it as an automatic. The master cylinders are modern master cylinders in the same style as the originals, and we've made them look like a cast aluminum or a vintage look on these things. You'll see we use details like that in other places as well, like the calipers on the car. So you've got a modern, high-performance piece of the system on the car that's now been made to look old and vintage when you're looking at the car on display or driving by you at 150 miles an hour. Okay, a couple of the close-ups of the details we were just talking about. We've got things like these master cylinders, the remote reservoir master cylinders in the original style that all fit up nicely to the original style plumbing. This has been upgraded to stainless, and then these have been taken from their black e-coat finish that we got them in to a vintage aluminum looking finish. So they look like the Girlings that the car would have come with originally. You'll notice subtle little things like the clutch master cylinder. We've custom made a little blank off plate for it, and we've just bolted that on there to cover up where the clutch would have been on most of the standard cars that were made out of these. We're trying to keep exact original things like the pedal box design, and then what would they have done back at Shelby in the day? No, they wouldn't have made a special pedal box. They would have just taken the standard pedal box for these things, and they would have covered that hole up and run them without a clutch master cylinder. So we're always looking for ways to duplicate what they would have done and the way they would have done it. You can see the heat shield insulation material wrapping around the pedal box on this thing. We've tucked it right up underneath the gas pedal quadrant on the car, and we're now starting to get into some of the details like installing the firewall, and we're really taking some time and trouble on this sort of stuff here, where we're putting weather strip in all the right places, and this is all being gapped to the body so that when you lower the body down around here and wrap it around these chassis tubes, that the weather stripping is going to be sealing up every little nook and cranny, because we don't want the heat going back into the cockpit of this car, and worst case scenario, we certainly don't want any flames or any fire that might possibly occur going back into the cockpit. This is why they call it a firewall, and we're making sure it works as a wall. Okay, we told you this was something special. What you're looking at here is the heartbeat and the power plant of this motor. This was screwed together by Performance Unlimited for us, and they've done a heck of a job putting this motor together, and they sent some cookies up from Florida for the shop dog with the motor. The motor, you funny dog. The motor is basically a stock FE 427 motor that's been stroked and bored out to a bigger displacement, and the brackets for these superchargers have all been developed per the original ones, and you'll have seen that in a previous episode, and how we come up with the design of something like that, and how we are taking photographs, drawings, anything we can from history, and turning it into something real we can actually use today. So I'm pretty excited with the way these brackets have all turned out for the superchargers for both sides, the tensioner, the old school spring-loaded tensioner for the drive belt on this thing. We've done a little deviation from original on this, because the original was driven on the superchargers by a single V-belt, and that was inclined to, because these superchargers take somewhere around like 60 to 65 horsepower a piece to drive these things, and driving them through a single V-belt under load, they were of course prone to some slippage. And so we've taken a little liberty here where we've added a serpentine belt to give us some more surface area, because we don't want any slippage going on with these things. When you're running this low on power, you need to make sure you've got it all available. So the other thing we've done with these brackets, so supercharger bracket either side, tensioner brackets built into it, cross brace bracket just like the original on the top, holding them apart from each other with the coil bracket built into that. And then you can see we have the low position for the alternator, and we custom made the brackets to fit that as well in the correct location. You see we've got the amperage denoted by the color of the stamp and all of the goofy little details that we're known for here. Because this thing is making 805 horsepower and a huge 900 foot-pounds of torque, this motor needs something special behind it to be able to handle all of that power. So what we've done with this is, again, pretty excited about developing up brackets for these sorts of things. This has got a pinion or a torsion bracket on the front and a top mounting bracket on the housing, so that we can put these brackets onto a Dutchman IRS center section with a Ford 9-inch, with a strange Ford 9-inch 31 spline differential. So you can have all this power going at the front, and it's actually going to get transmitted to the back end of the car. Goofy details again, you know, made the bracket so that this will fit right into a stock chassis, but now you've got a big upgrade on the rear end for a pretty affordable price. We take the time and trouble to mask it up and make it the brick red color, so anybody looking underneath the car is going to see something that looks very much like the originals. The other big piece of the drivetrain, this is the lifting plate, so we can install the thing on top here. The painted and finished brackets are underneath it. The other thing, important part of the drivetrain, is this lump here. we've built a C6 automatic transmission like the original cars had, with the cruiser-matic shift handle on it as used in the Mustangs. So this transmission, to handle this much power and more importantly this much torque, has been specially built for this. It is a manually shifted automatic transmission with a reverse pattern shifter in it to just handle that much torque and that much power out of this thing. You can see these have been carefully matched up to Ford blue, period correct colors. We have the darker blue on the Paxton superchargers, and anguishing over the details and having access to pictures of the original car in various stages of completion gives us a good eye and a good insight into all of the details that we're striving for to make not just a replica of a car, but a recreation of a car. We have been hunting for years for the correct parts for this car. We were very excited to find the Cobra, powered by Ford, correct original valve covers for this motor. These came up available, we grabbed them. God bless eBay. Again, eBay to the rescue. We found the little moon breathers and we installed those on the side of these period correct valve covers. The little details like that are going to be the things that absolutely make this car as it was. How we didn't want to make it how it was where the intakes for the superchargers were open to the road, and they would suck the road dirt in there like a huge shop vac. And so we found some very nice discreet little mesh inside two wire screens sandwiched between them with a nice molded rubber boot. And so these are absolutely perfect for the intake of the superchargers for screening out foreign object damage if you're an aircraft guy. Alright, there's a lot of pieces that go into making the whole car, and either fortunately or unfortunately we've got our hands in all of them. What we're looking at here is the seats of the car, and I love bending tube. I especially love it when I can make nice parts like this, and this is the pretty much completed frame of a 427 style seat. We make all the pieces of tube up with the bending machinery. There's about 4 different types of benders we use to make this sort of a frame up in pieces, and then we put it all together. We build a fixture, we put the seats together to dimensions, and we'll reverse engineer the seat to build a fixture out of it so that we can repeat it, and we can make our patterns work for further seats, and we can make them consistent, and they're all very exact to fit into the car and make absolute optimum use of the minimal amount of space in these small cars. We're lucky enough from time to time, as I've mentioned previously, to get original parts in here, and that's really fun for us because we can take details like these early 289 seats and we can very much reverse engineer them, and we can copy them to be able to replicate them and build modern replicas of these type of things. You can see here that these seats are made in a very similar method, the supercharger method, to the bodywork. So you've seen what a finished frame looks like. We put the frame up on the table. We will get out one of our favorite tools, which is poster board. We'll translate that over to a pattern for the sheet metal, and the sheet metal gets turned into a program for the CNC plasma cutter. We burn out things like this part here, and this then gets wrapped around the frame of the seat, very much the same way that the body of the car gets wrapped around the chassis of it. This is the superleggera construction method. It's an age-old Italian technique of hand-making cars around the birdcage or the framework of them. So yeah, we're working on a neat pair of red leather 289 seats at the moment, which is what this will become. And we're also building the 427 style seats with the measurements, tooling, fixturing, all as it would have been done back in the day, all to very exact dimensions, hand fitted to the car. Something that drives me crazy about a lot of the modern seats you get is they overstuff them. When you look at this method of building seats, you've got something that's very light, it's very rigid, so it's nice and stiff in the car so you can get a good seating position and hold that position and be held in. It's very comfortable because it's very much been shaped around you, and yet with this construction method of this light aluminum sheet over the lightweight tubular framework, you've got all the strength and rigidity you need, you've got the comfort you need because it's been built around you to shape and fit, and then it is very minimal upholstery over all this so that it keeps you down low and far back and fits inside these tiny little cars. So this combination of techniques to build something like a seat absolutely delights me because the end result is something that's very functional, very traditional, very accurate, and there it is. We'll show you these how they turn out from when they've been through the trimmer. We have a great trimmer guy that does a fabulous upholstery job for us, and we'll show you the results of these things when they're all finished.